Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kosher Wine Podcast. I'm Rabbi Yisroel Bernath, and I'm here with Dr. Kenny Friedman. I think from this moment forward, we can just call each other by our first names. Does that work?
I rarely get doctor from anyone, so that's fine.
So we had this insane idea. The idea was a really simple idea to talk about kosher wine. We both have and have been talking, drinking, writing about kosher wine for over 15 years. Correct? How many years for you?
The drinking wine's been a lot longer than 15. I would say I very much got into wine. I have to give credit to my older brother, Dr. Mike Friedman. Some of you may know him, who really got me into wine. And then I think the next big wine for me was one of those first Shiraz wine, the Shiraz from California, and I really like. And ever since then,
Really, Gabe and Shimon got it for you, huh?
I mean, that was, I'm not embarrassed to say what, I can't even remember what it's called. It was some Bordeaux that I had, cheap Bordeaux, the first one I had, and I'm like, I think in my earlier years, I was like a lot of like yeshiva type guys. I was into scotch and whatever, and like wine is just. I think by nature, I'm someone that likes to tinker and to understand things, and wine is so nuanced, and there's such interesting stories with it. And I do have a background in journalism, and I think I like to write and learn, as you do, obviously. And it just it fits the bill. Wine, it's just there's so much character to wine, and every winery has. It's not every winery has an interesting story, but wineries all have stories. And I think what's like what I tell people all the time is that wine is a little more unique in that it's not as there's not that very commercially produced thing that they're going for. Coca-Cola should taste exactly the same this year as it did 5 years ago. That's what they do.
Right.
Wine is not going to, for reasons that we can discuss. But that's, I think, something I like about it. How about you?
Right.
What was your...
So I grew up in Chicago, and my wife and I showed up in Montreal. I got a job as a rabbi here 20 years ago. And I pulled out a bottle of Rashi for Kiddush. And the Montrealers all looked at me. It was the first week we were here. They're like, "Where's the wine?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And that was really my opening. Is I always say, the world is where they make the wine. Montreal is where they drink the wine. It's normal for people here to have a glass of wine with dinner.
Right. And
every night.
That's probably the French aspect of Montreal, right?
Exactly.
I would imagine.
So we have that European influence.
Right.
And because of that, I ended up breaking bread with sommeliers, with wine enthusiasts, with wine aficionados. And that was just my opening, where I had one sommelier that was sitting at my Shabbat table and said, "Rabbi, you have a palate. Like, you can actually do something with this. I'd like to introduce you to a master som who lives here in Montreal who can teach you." And that was the beginning. It was before WSET and all of the official wine accreditations. And I used to sit with a group, I actually still do, with a group of sommeliers, which I was really happy to be able to talk about kosher wine with them, because it's something that they never knew about, and something that they definitely Israeli wine as well they never knew about. And they taught me a lot of what I know, and then obviously, as you did, later went for professional training.
Right. But I think we have the same type of story, that it's just, organic, the learning and the appreciation for it. And didn't set out to do this at the beginning, nor did you. And, it's just something that, you build and develop out of passion for it, which I have. And I think you do.
Out of all of our wine credentials, I'll tell you what inspires me the most about the two of us and what we have in common. And I think that is something I really want to lean into and talk about over the course of these episodes that we're going to do together. And that is that neither one of us has ever smelled or had a non-kosher bottle of wine, which means our entire knowledge of the breadth and depth of wine is all through the lens of the kosher world, which is why I think calling this the Kosher Wine Podcast makes a lot of sense.
I agree. I think that is unique. And, it's, some people would say limiting. I think the opposite is. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, but I think it's not limiting at all to, and certainly nowadays in the kosher wine world, it's exploding and has for really half of a century almost. And I take pride in that.
I think so. I also do. I don't know anything else. I know artists always say that the best art is created when you limit, when you constrict. So I think this limit has created an amazing art. And the kosher wine world, look, I got started almost 20 years ago. In the past 20 years, it's a whole different,
it's incredible,
a whole different world.
It's incredible. Yeah, I think that's the case even when you apply it to kosher food. And I've heard chefs talk about it, and I'm very into food and even, doing my own food. And you talk to chefs, and a chef that would come into a kosher restaurant, someone who would be not used to doing kosher food, and I think they relish the opportunity to work in a specific confines of kosher, and like being able to produce something equally as great as they've ever done in the kosher sphere. And I think that, and of course, wine is not nearly as limiting. Really, it's not limiting at all to be kosher. So,
right.
But anyway, it's just an interesting side point.
There's another interesting element of wine that I think isn't spoken about enough. And last night I was doing a wine tasting, and most of the room was Hasidic, and they said, "Oh, you're a rabbi, and you love wine. What's the Torah? What's the Torah on wine? What's the Devar Torah on wine?" And I said, there could really be anything that God could have chosen for us to celebrate Him, anything that God could have chosen for us to honor, but every single celebration we have, whether it's Shabbat or a holiday, whether it's a wedding, a bris, whatever it is, we honor it with wine. I mean, it could have been a pomegranate. The pomegranate is a really nice Jewish fruit. It could have, I could think so many other amazing foods or beverages, or even non-foods and beverages that could have been used to honor God.
I include that in a lot of my writing. Everything. Think about it, and think about the usage of it in the Torah. It's all over the place, good and bad, by the way.
Oh yes,
good and bad. So,
we can talk about Noah and his daughters, and Lot and his daughters, and
right. And that's like anything else God creates. I think a metaphor. Like there's what's good about something and what's bad about something. So.
Yeah, or the opposite. Yehudit and the Halifernes, the general. The story of Hanukkah. Like there's so many. I mean, we can go all over the place in Jewish history.
Purim and Esther and Haman and the right.
That's right. And the feast. Yes.
It's wine, right?
Yes. They definitely weren't serving bourbon.
Right.
And that's interesting also to think about the vast expanse of Jewish history and how much wine is really part and parcel with all of Jewish history.
Right. And we both, I'm sure, do lots of wine tastings, and specifically wine tastings, Israel wines. And of course, should we mention buy Israeli wine now more than ever?
Absolutely.
Bring our hostages home safely. But the thing with Israel that I like to include all the time is that Israel internationally is known as a very modern wine, region. But of course, it's the original wine region, as we know. It's both the original, but was shut down for some time in the middle centuries, but it's made quite the rebirth. And in fact, was something I was thinking about as we were talking before, is that, with the changing temperatures of the world and what have you, France is really seeing effects of it. What they're doing in the desert in Israel is really amazing, where they're producing wines there, and really like world-class wines in the desert of Israel. It's really an amazing
Negev wines. Some of them are
amazing,
outstanding.
Amazing, and it's really incredible how they're doing that. So
yeah, I mean, I hope we'll be able to get winemakers to join us, and like Yaakov Oreo, what he's doing in the Negev with the Pinto wines and some of the other winemakers. It's just unbelievable.
Sure, I love Nana, and that's a beautiful place to visit, Mitzvah Ramon.
Yes.
So, but. Yeah, but for today's purposes, we are not discussing in Israeli wine. Are you ready to get into the wine yet? Or
yeah, let's get into wine. So we thought this is our idea, and obviously this is open to you. You're listening, and which means you're part of our community now. And you tell us how you want us to do this. Right. We thought just one wine an episode. We're just going to talk about a wine until there's nothing else to talk about or drink about.
And the kind of the idea is to feature wines that are mostly available. And we're not going to necessarily only limit it to, because that's, you go into some cities, there may be 2 wines, but mostly available. And for now, at least, but who knows? This is organic like everything else, and we'll see where this goes. But for today's purposes, I'll let Rabbi Yisroel. I have to decide what to call you. I told you. Of course, I would call you Rabbi Bernath.
No, you can.
But
Just call me that guy.
That we've decided to feature this Herzog. So when we were discussing this 5 minutes before the episode, we decided to. Herzog is probably the most well-known name, at least in American wines. The Herzog name is. Herzog has been around for, I think it's 9 generations now.
Yeah.
Winemaking. This is going off my memory. We did not study this, but
and that's part of the joy of this. If you
right,
want to anyone wants to fact check us, you can fact check us. We're not going to be, everything's off memeries. We're not planning anything.
There's some history podcast I listen to where he spends like 5 minutes going over all his errors from the previous episode. But they started in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And in fact, one interesting tidbit is that within a not, such a long time, and this is in the 19th century, it was considered such good wine and brought to the Royal Empire, or to the Royal Palace, I should say, that they gave that Herzog specifically, I don't remember what his name was, the title of a baron, which is where we get that line of wines for Herzog, is the Baron Herzog. It's named in his honor. Then, of course, the darkness of the early 20th century, the Herzog family, who in fact lost family in the Holocaust, came to America. I think it was Eugene Herzog. I may be wrong on that name, but he went to work for what was, I forget what the name of the company was. Was it Royal? I don't even remember. He went to work as like a truck driver, delivery guy, and everything guy for this company in New York. And within like 15, 20 years, he was the majority shareholder, bought the company out and produced it and built it into Kedem. Then, of course, in the 1980s, I want to say 1985, they moved out and built their beautiful facility in California. That's a little history of it. But of course, they produce, wines across the spectrum of cost, and probably most known for their cabs, which we're going to drink today. But really world-class wines. And
what I give them credit for is they have brought to light and really helped catapult the kosher wine market into what it is today. They have really allowed the average consumer access, whether through distribution, whether through finding new wineries. And today, you and I were just at the KFWE, their annual event in New York. And the next day after that event, that wonderful event, I ended up spending most of the day in their warehouse in Bayonne, New Jersey.
Oh, cool.
And one of the things I love to do when I go to the warehouse, I hope they're not listening.
I hope they are listening, but I don't know.
Maybe they're going to listen. But I love to just walk the warehouse. I literally walk the aisles because I find wines that are just sitting there that I never knew were there. And I don't even know why. I mean,
they probably just assume you're a mashgiach, by the way.
Exactly. No one bothers me. They just like, oh, I'm just one of the guys. I fit right in because everyone looks just like me there. And I have this access. Obviously, don't touch anything, but I just have this, and it just to see the breadth and depth of kosher wine through this warehouse,
right, of
just thousands and thousands of bottles is one of the. It's just to see what kosher wine has become.
Unbelievable, right?
It's unbelievable,
right?
And that is one place. Obviously, most of us don't have access to it, but that is really one place where you can see that in real life in just the aisles of a warehouse.
Right. That's incredible. I have not seen that. I guess I have to grow a beard before my next visit there. But that's very cool. And I think you're 100% right. It's like what they've done is kind of unparalleled as a family and as a company. So which is kind of why we decided to start with them, I think.
I think it's only proper. And they have a number of really nice cabs. I mean, the one I think that's most well known is their Napa Valley Cab.
Mm-hmm.
And but there's one that I guess has become the Alexander Valley Cab that we're going to try today has become better known in the past couple of years.
Could be. Yeah, I personally have found in more recent years that the Alexander Valley is more to my taste than the Napa, which is a little fuller, I think. There's a reason for that, I think, in that Napa is a little more, Napa's a warmer environment than Sonoma, which is where Alexander Valley is. There's something we always learned in that all the wine classes. It's just how geography affects, and I know that Sonoma sits right next to the Sonoma Mountains and the Mayacamas Mountains, and sheltered from the Pacific, but it's still a cooler type of region. I think what it's kind of known for is it's vast, what they call diurnal range, like really hot during the day, really cool at night. And when I say really hot, I mean for wine and whatever, but it's
right,
which gives it a really, kind of a special place in California. Just
right.
as like a general idea, geography-wise, and my California geography is terrible. I'm very much an East Coast person. Like I think I remember once asking someone like, so San Francisco's near LA, right? And like, no,
exactly.
LA.
All you have to do is take the one. That's it.
That's right.
It's that simple.
I think like an hour and a half. So I'm talking Alexander Valley is like an hour and a half north of San Francisco. Does that make sense?
I think that's correct.
I think.
If somebody knows better than me, you can correct us.
It'll be at the top of the next episode.
Exactly. I know that it's above Napa, so that would make sense.
Well, I'm not gonna say right. I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely remember going there, and I was surprised. I always thought Alexander Valley was somewhere between Napa and LA, but actually it's above Napa, which I think is unique as well because you get the mountainous region,
right,
and you also get like that really hot baked sun,
right,
and both of those together, that's why you're getting that kind of a lot of differences in the wines.
That's why Alexander Valley is its own, we'll call it an AVA, American Viticultural Area, which has its own restrictions and all that kind of stuff. But more, it's about that it's a microclimate, as they would call it. Like what it has its own very specific climate there, which is kind of unique. Anyway, I always love this Alexander Valley, specifically in the last few years. An interesting thing about this 2020, when it first came out, I was very interested to try it because you remember 2020 was it's gotten a lot worse, but I think it was called the glass fires, or they had all those terrible fires in the area.
I remember that.
And wine can be affected, dramatically by it. The interesting thing is that it's usually not even picked up. They can't even make the decision right away, like tasting a grape, like, this is not going to be good, and scrap the whole project. They have to make a major decision early on. Like, are we going to turn these grapes into wine or not? Because there's obviously, especially for a big company, major money at stake for things like that. So they have to make decisions early on. And a lot of times that smoke, what they call smoke taint, doesn't even show up right away. It'll show up either maybe during fermentation or even afterwards once it's in the bottle. And there's people, you can look it up if you're that interested. But I mean, because I find this stuff interesting. Like the science behind it is very interesting, but it's a very interesting thing. And I don't know if you're drinking this right now. It's I don't know where we all are, but it's 3:30 where we are, and
it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, it is. But amazingly not, at least at this point, affected by the smoke taint. So, and it's
that's interesting. I actually never thought about that it would have been affected, but it definitely, there's no peatiness in it at all.
No, you don't get that. You don't get that. Right. Peatiness is a great, back in my Scotch days, that was my, I love the peat.
Right.
I should probably use the word peat in my wine writing more often.
It's just a great word to use. I don't even think peatiness is a word, but
right. You sound like you know what you're talking about. It's working. You just always have to sound like you know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
I've learned that as I get older. So, but a great, like, how good does that smell? Like,
yeah. This is just, I mean, you're getting obviously the strong, like the nose right away. The cherry just hits you.
Right. exactly. I would say like black cherry, maybe like a dark, riper cherry, but cherry
Mm-hmm.
very much,
Yes.
right? Yeah, like I don't know, tobacco and maybe a little. You smell that oak, like vanilla, maybe something like that.
How long was this in oak? It is very oaky.
Looking if it says it on the bottle. I want to say maybe I may even have some notes somewhere.
No, we don't have to. It's fine.
I think it's typically like I think they do like a year on oak, something like
Yeah,
that.
it's. I would say even more than a year because it's really oaky.
Yeah, well, a lot of that also depends, as you know, as I've learned in more recent years, is that a lot of that's also what kind of oak they use, specifically what oak, and like if it's used oak versus new oak, all that stuff will
Right.
all factor into it. But
Well, how amazing is the grape that it is affected by everything,
Right.
It's affected by the weather. It's affected by the oak that it's stored in and how long it's stored there.
Right. And the soil very much so. You can plant you can take the same exact plant, move it somewhere else in the world, and you will have a very different end product. Very different end product. So I already had made a bracha off camera because I tasted it before.
I haven't made a bracha yet.
I'm going to let you.
But 80% of drinking wine is smelling it, right? A lot of people don't know that.
Well, you know, your palate is nothing without your nose, really. I mean, you have your generic, you know, salty, sweet type of things going on in your tongue. But without that, of course, that's why when you have a cold, you can't taste anything, mostly because you know, the thing I was most afraid of during the whole COVID scare is like how it's going to affect my wine palate if that ever happened. But Baruch Hashem.
You have to get insurance on your wine palate. So what's interesting about this, and I think that a lot of people who aren't drinking regularly, and I think this was one of the most shocking things for me when I first discovered wine, is just the time that that we spend just smelling the wine, because it really is so much about the wine experience. Often you drink it, you're like, that's very alcoholic. Well, that means you didn't get a good smell. If you're saying that's just very alcoholic.
Some wines, I mean, it's a wine's fault to be very alcoholic. It is possible, but people would say that if it's right. You know, I think when I first started really learning about how to smell wine and whatever, because it's one of these things, you hear people like, what are you talking about? That's smelling, you know, unripe elderberries. What are you talking about? That kind of stuff. And I try not to get crazy with that outside of when we were learning it and getting tested on it. Like I try to stick to the main category.
My wife used to always say at the Shabbat table, stop talking about your food.
Well, my father always, like everyone else growing up, I always smelled everything because I was, I guess, curious by nature. And he was, and I think it's paid off at this point. So, you know, you can tell, not financially, but I can talk about it.
Outside of the cherry, there's a really strong note that I'm getting here.
Yeah.
I'm going to say like a red currant almost. It's not even subtle. Like it's really coming out. But I agree with you on the black cherry. Like it's so cherry that I would say even like an overripe black cherry.
Right. I think ripe black cherry. That's where I would go with that. And I think the most common big category notes that I'm getting from it are like tobacco, vanilla, black cherry.
Right. Now there is some subtlety with the oak, and generally in oak you're going to get other scents that are going to come out of that, right? I'm going to say there's a very, very faint, almost nutmeg vanilla, but very faint. Do you think that over time the oak will be one of the first scents that will go away as the bottle ages?
Oak and that type of thing integrates more as a bottle ages. But I don't know the speed at which that occurs relative to the primary fruit. Meaning that's, as a bottle like this, that's really inclined to age. This wine can we'll get into that whole thing at a different time about how to know and whatever. But certain wines the vast majority of wines are not meant to age. They're in a bottle. They're meant to drink now. A wine like this is very what they call approachable now. You can open this and right out of the gate, it's delicious and approachable.
But it will age well.
But it will age. And then
it is lightly filtered, which means that it does have sediment in it, and that sediment is good for aging.
Well,
okay, yeah.
I'm gonna taste it.
Okay, I'm gonna make a bracha here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam barei pri hagafen.
Amen.
So when you're drinking wine, for those of you who have never, besides, so there's our friend Kenny. I have a hard time with spitting out wine.
Oh, trust me.
And I think a lot of Jews are going to relate to this.
Well, like I said, I made a bracha off camera and I drank that one.
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to, but I can't go nuts until tonight. I will enjoy this bottle very much tonight, especially after it gets a little air.
So what do you think about aerating the bottle?
So I am a big believer in rarely, if ever, decanting a bottle of wine. I certainly wouldn't do it right out of the gate. Like a lot of people will open it, pour it right into a decanter. I'm like, What are you doing that based on? They don't know. I mean, there's no answer for that. We know that decanting is done to give oxygen to wine. The thing is, very few wines need oxygen for the same reason we were talking about that the vast majority, 90% and up of wines are meant to drink now for the same reason they don't need oxygen.
Correct.
So,
and what about those little aerator machineries things that you buy on Amazon?
Maybe, I don't know. I'm someone that I like pouring in the glass. Like, this is a bottle, like, I may open this on a Friday, right? I head out to shul. I open the bottle beforehand. I may or may not take a sip then. But then, I let it stay open until I get back from shul, right? Which is an hour and a half, 2 hours by the time I'm, like, actually eating or something like that, which is an appropriate time for a bottle like this.
And you're just doing that because you're just letting it air. You're letting oxygen.
For some bottles, for some bottles that I know that I'm going to just let this is the type of bottle like that's going to do well with like a couple hours. But in general, I may do that with a lot of wines on a Friday night. I'm never pouring it in a decanter unless I know that this is a bottle that needs to be decanted like right away, like a very young high-end Bordeaux or something like that. But you shouldn't be drinking that then anyway. That's a different story. But yeah, I mean, that may improve that way. But otherwise, I'm going to just, as the meal goes along, I'm going to be doing this the whole time and, and letting it get air and changing in the glass, as they say. And like, then you see as it develops. And that's how you kind of like build knowledge of what wines you need to decant and not, and so on and so forth. But for the most part, I don't decant anything. And I rarely use aerators or any of these things.
I so agree with you. If I can't open a bottle and it's not drinkable, it means it's not ready to drink. That's it. It's not because I didn't let it sit for overnight. People will say, "Oh, tomorrow morning it's that much better." Probably because it's not ready to drink.
That's right. That's right. But
this is not the case.
So what do you notice when you taste this? Do you think this is a wine that you would put away? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a good question. It's definitely approachable, which means it's definitely ready to drink now. There's no problem drinking it now. I just opened this bottle, so I didn't let it air out at all. And that's for me, the number one sign. If you can open a bottle and you pour yourself a little drink and it didn't need any air, it just was right out of the bottle, then you know it's ready to drink.
Right. And I think that's the case here, but it's, Cabernet Sauvignon is like the biggest grape. And it's why I think a lot of people like it. It's offers like, it's bold, as the word like people would use. And a lot of times it is a little rough out of the gate, which is why a lot of times it's blended with other things like Merlot specifically. It's a classic Bordeaux blend, as they call it.
Right.
It softens it up and that type of thing. But you can taste that this is Cab. It's big. I mean, this is a big wine.
It's definitely
something that's interesting about this is that it's 15% alcohol, but it's not hot. It's not alcoholic when you drink it, And that's like why I was thinking that when you said that, because I know that this actually has an ABV, like the alcohol by volume, of 15%, which is just
very
pretty high.
Very high.
You're thinking like Bordeaux used to force their wineries. One of their restrictions on higher wines was that it had to get to like 12.5%. I mean, that has to do with the region and cold and hot and that type of thing, which is why grapes ripen and sugar and alcohol. But 15% is traditionally a high number. But it's not apparent here. It's not like burning your tongue, which, right?
There are some people, and I'll say this, that will walk into a wine shop and judge the wine by the level of alcohol, which I don't think that's fair to the wine.
Yeah, I that's probably true. But it's definitely not fair to the wine, no. But if you see, we were talking about something recently with some friends, and there's like some wine floating around that's like, I don't know what number it is. It's crazy high, which you only see with something where they force it to be that number, like port wine, which is very high alcohol.
Right.
It's based on how it's made and whatever. But like a regular table wine, a Cabernet, should not be, 16, 17%. You're not going to see those numbers really. But that's the point I was just going to make, is that this is 15%, and it's not overbearing or over alcoholic. I don't find
you don't have that, people call it that bitiness of the alcohol. Yeah. It's very, very smooth when it comes to the actual alcohol.
I just traditionally think, by now, by the way, this is the bottle that you're probably going to find on most store racks. I don't know what the word is, but the 2021 just recently came out. I think it may even be in Baltimore. I'm based in Baltimore. I never mentioned that. And it may even be in Baltimore by now, but 2020 you're still going to find all over the place. And these are bottles you really could buy a case of and open one a year for the next 12 years, something like that. I think that's a great move, honestly, and you're going to reward yourself in 10, 12 years when you drink that bottle. But
and even try to make some notes as you're opening it and see from year to year how that taste changes for you, and if there is some notes that kind of come out as the years go on.
One of the first things I used to start learning wine was like one of these. They have these tasting charts. That's it says like, they'll say like red fruit, and then you're like, I see that. When you're looking at the words, you're like, and you're thinking like, oh yeah, strawberry. I actually can smell that a little bit. Like it's a good way to like start developing that.
Yeah, I remember one of my first lessons is the Somm that taught me actually brought out all the fruits, and we were smelling the actual fruits while we're tasting the wine, and that was really amazing.
Yeah, that's the best way to do that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and I tell everyone, just taste everything you can. I mean, like it's if you've never tasted something, you can't characterize anything as such. That's how you know it. But I think some people try to get away with it.
Absolutely.
But there is obviously, you'll see in wine notes and whatever, you'll see things like wet wool. Now, no one tastes wet wool, but that smell. You can think of it even.
Right.
I always thought it was an interesting thing that you can think of a smell, because those are two different.
I think where it really started making sense for me, at least, is when they came out with those funny jelly bellies.
Right.
They had like the Burt's Bees from the Harry Potter.
Right, like Harry Potter
series, like the smelly socks and the wipes, and like that actually tastes like baby wipes.
Yeah,
and you start realizing, how did they do that? Where they created that taste in the jelly bean.
I grew up with scratch and sniff stickers.
Right,
that was always I love those. I was like, why don't they make those anymore? Maybe they do. But my kids are not little anymore, so I don't know. But go ahead.
Maybe it's psychosomatic. Maybe it's not.
What, the ability to be able to do that? I think so.
Yeah.
I think, there's a lot of things like that. And in wine is one of them. But like music, you listen to a song and it can really take you to a certain time in your life and a certain feeling that you had then. And like, it's human mind is an interesting thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
For sure.
I really like this. I like this cab. I like California cabs in general. I think that the grape itself grows very well, especially the Napa Sonoma region. And this one,
the most known, California and Napa and Sonoma Cab are, one of the most known.
And I think that they do. It's a very predictable. Though I will say, because I recently had the 2021 while I was in New Jersey,
right,
and I haven't had the 2020 since then. Right. I would say that the 2020 is drinking a little better than the 21 right now. I
think that's probably true right now. I think that the 21 has again, this is my opinion for whatever it's worth, which is probably little. But I think the 21 has a very bright future out of it. I think it's a really top wine. I think, and I'm thinking of the last four. I would rank my choices as 21, then the 18, then this 20, then the 19. But all great wines.
I would say,
and I'm kind of making a ratio of both long term and the right now.
Right now, the 18 to me is something special. So I agree with you. The 21, I just had it once so far. I haven't. I don't know yet.
You got to sit down, and you can't taste anything of these. Wine tasting. I mean, I can't. At least I go to see people and whatever.
But I was actually, Jay opened up a bottle in Bayonne for me
of the 21.
Of the 21. So I just had it there. So I was sitting with him in his office, and we were drinking it, and we were talking about it.
It's awesome. Yeah,
we'll have to get him on our podcast here
for sure. Neither of us will have to say anything, too, Jay.
I know exactly. He'll talk about everything. Yeah. Well, so I was in a wine shop, and I said to the owner, "We're thinking about making a podcast, and what would be beneficial for you?" And he said, "I sell kosher wine, and I don't know very much about kosher wine. I just know." And so he said, "For me, if I had a way that I could listen to someone talk about the wine, so that I knew how to talk to the people about it." So I think that what a nice way for us to kind of sum up this little episode here. Right. Let's talk about this Alexander Valley in a way that this shop owner can talk to someone about it, and he can be able to be knowledgeable enough to give them a good bottle of wine, because that's really what we want at the end of the day. We want you to be able to be just knowledgeable enough right now to be able to know what wine you like, because the best bottle of wine is the wine you like, and be able to know whether this is a wine that you're interested in or not interested in. So let's get started. So we have we're talking about the Herzog Alexander Valley 2020. How would you describe this if you had to describe this?
I want to stop 1 second. I happen to think, and people always say, like, we got to get people outside of drinking cabs all the time. And I'm thinking, man, we should not have started with a cab. But you know what? But it is the most like commonly, and I think a lot of that is people walk into the wine stores and don't know anything. And a lot of people in wine stores, like you're saying, that work for wine stores don't know anything about wine and are afraid of the words and the names. I think what's great about this is that this is a great entry. Like, now, by the way, this is a $40 bottle or more or less, so it's not cheap.
US,
but it's not. It's not. Most people can afford this as a special wine at least, and I think it's a great entry wine, especially for people maybe that are not even necessarily familiar with kosher, but even if you are, because it's classic Sonoma, California cab. This is what you're looking for. This is exactly the type of wine that is going to give you a great example of why California and Sonoma cab and Alexander cab specifically are famous. That's what I would say. This is a classic example of that style of wine.
And spring, summer is coming. You're gonna have barbecues. This is a great barbecue wine.
This is your classic meat wine. I mean, it's a big, California red, and it could stand up to anything. It's got enough acid in there. It's got enough fruit in there, and it's got enough tannin in there that it's not going to be, covered over by a steak or a burger or anything like that. And it's not out of the price range for most people. And it's also a bottle that I honestly, I'm proud to bring this to anyone as a gift. Because of the price tag. It's a nice level, meaning, so it's a nice gift. It stands up to, I would imagine, any other types of Sonoma cabs, kosher, not kosher. So it's really like, I think, a perfect example of in a wine store or a liquor store of this type of thing. If I'm pushing this, I'm not pushing it. If I'm a wine salesman, I'm like, this is a classic California cab. That's a great, exactly, you said, great for any kind of food, and I think it's going to make almost anyone at the table happy, because it covers a lot of bases.
And I think if you have somebody coming to your table, or you're going to someone's table and they haven't only had kosher wine in their life, this is a wine that they will appreciate.
I totally agree. Because it's not an extreme anything. It's just very tasty. It's got a lot of fruit in it, and it's just very enjoyable for anyone that likes wine should like this wine and be impressed by it. So I don't know if that's what we were shooting for with that, but I think that's what I would say.
Yeah. So I want to just kind of lean into this just a little more. I want you just to pretend, Kenny, for a moment, someone walked into to your wine shop and they asked you for a bottle. What would you say? Why are you so excited about this bottle, and why do you want them to have this bottle?
Well, exactly what I just said before. I think this is a perfect example of a California cab that's shows great fruit, that's age appropriate. I mean, not age appropriate, but that is ageable, that has like character to it, that has structure to it, that goes with most foods you're going to put on your table. Well, most like larger meals. I mean, I wouldn't pair this with a delicate, something, like a delicate piece of fish. But even then, I always think a lot of that stuff's overrated. But, I think this is a classic California cab from a well-known producer that, covers all of the bases. I think it's a great wine for someone that doesn't know a lot about wine and wants to start understanding what California cab is about. And I think it's a type of wine that just, it happens to be kosher. It's a perfect example of like why kosher wine is the same as every other wine. That's you and I saying that to people that never tasted not kosher.
Correct.
But I know this to be true. Speaking to countless people about it, it's a great example of Alexander Valley Cab. It's just a well-made wine. A side thing, by the way, is that, and I remember this, Herzog had a well-known winemaker named Joe Herleman for many years, and this was his last vintage, 2020.
Wow.
Before he passed away, this was the last one he made. So I
Wow.
remember that.
L'chaim to him.
That's right.
L'chaim to him.
The Shama Shavanaliyah. Anyway,
wow. I think somebody,
this is a lot. Go ahead.
If somebody made it this far, listening to us,
it's a lot longer than we were setting out for, but we're both people that talk. But I think moving forward, it won't be this long. It was a good.
If you made it this far, we're giving you permission. You can, you're allowed to comment. You're allowed to ask us questions. We're happy to answer your questions, and we'll put an email in the show notes so that you can send us emails and questions. And I know the first question that came up for me when I was just thinking, when you were just talking, is mavushal and non-mavushal, which we'll talk about in the future.
Actually thought about that. I'm like, we're not getting into that. This is getting too long.
I know, exactly. But we will talk about that in a future episode.
Sure.
And I think this is great. And thank you for spending all this time with us. And Kenny, thank you for spending this time with me. This is fantastic.
I look forward, and I hope this one of many. Always great to be with you, Rabbi.
Same here.